A reading from the book of Luke, chapter 15, beginning with verse 11, the parable of the prodigal son. He quath, sot liche summan hafta twegen suna. Ta quath sayengro to his father, Father, sella me minna dale minra achta, de me to ibireth. He deelde him his achta. Tha after feon dagum, all his thing yagaroda sayengro suna, and fared radliche, on forlen riche, and forspielde there, all his achta, libende on his gelsen. Tha he hier hafta alle mirade, that worth mikkel hunger on them riche, and he worth wadla. That is what the beginning of the prodigal son sounded like to people who were speaking English circa the year 1000. Yes, believe it or not, that was English. That was Old English, specifically. Some of the words people used then, words like sothliche, which means truly, have just disappeared, which is unfortunate because I really like that word. But some words sound pretty similar. Man is man, suna is sons, yagadaroda is gathered. If you listen carefully, you can hear the creaky old bones of our contemporary language rattling around underneath the surface of that Old English language. And I think that's really important because it reminds us that we have a direct connection to the people who were living on this earth and speaking English more than 1,000 years ago. Those people were living lives that were very, very different than ours in a lot of ways, but not so different from ours in other ways. This parable, the story of a father and his two sons, it made sense to them, just like it makes sense to us. And I think that's a pretty amazing connection. I'm always fascinated by the things that people have in common with each other, especially when they are separated in significant ways, by centuries, as in the case of this story, or by continents, or just by very different cultures. And I think that's one of the reasons why I am just completely obsessed with this website called Humans of New York. I don't know if any of you have looked at this website. It's a terrific website. They also have a Facebook page. I highly recommend them both. It's really a very simple concept. There's a guy, a photographer named Brandon Stanton, who goes out and walks the streets of New York and takes photographs of people and interviews them a little bit and talks to them a little bit. Sometimes he asks them a standard set of questions, like what was the happiest moment of your life? What was the saddest moment of your life? And my favorite question is, if you could give a large group of people one piece of advice, what would that be? And the amazing thing to me about these interviews with these people who are, let's remember, complete strangers to each other. They don't know each other. They just happen to be walking down the street at the same time. But the amazing thing is, in spite of the fact that they are very different ages, different ethnicities, different religious backgrounds, all the interviews are kind of similar. The saddest moment of someone's life very often involves a parent or a child, sometimes the death of that person, sometimes the departure of that person, sometimes just a moment of disappointment in that person. The happiest moments of people's lives also tend to involve those people, parents and children. And when it comes to the question of giving advice to others, those answers are always pretty similar too. What we tend to hear is appreciate what you have when you have it, get along with each other. Don't be afraid to go back and admit when you have made a mistake. Now, interestingly, that advice is exactly what the prodigal son in this parable that we started with ignores, and that's the thing that gets him into big trouble. Instead of trying to get along with his family, he decides he's fed up with his father and his brother, and he wants to leave. Instead of appreciating what he has, he asks his father if he can have his inheritance. He says, I'm going to get it when you die, so why not just give it to me now and I can enjoy it while I'm young? And so the father gives it to him, he deelde him his achta, and the son goes off and goes away to party it up in the city, libende on his gelsen. Of course, when that son runs out of money, that's when he realizes that he made a big mistake, right? Tends to happen that way. And that's when he realizes that he should have appreciated what he had, because now he has nothing. He has no money, and there's a famine spreading across the country. And he knows he's probably going to have to go home and face his dad because he is starving to death. And nobody really cares because they're all worried about themselves. And he is just hoping that his dad will care when he turns around and goes back home. So what does happen when he goes home? His father who has to be angry and disappointed in this child, because this kid just took his money and took off. And we don't know exactly how long he was gone, but long enough for a famine to sweep across the country, so a while, I'm assuming. And nobody knew where this kid was or what he was doing or whether he was dead or alive. So this father has to be sad and disappointed and angry, but he skips right over all of that. And he's just so happy to see his kid coming home again. He's so happy to see his son that when he sees him coming down the road, headed toward home, he runs to meet him and hugs him and kisses him. In the Old English, he beklippte henne and kissed henne. He's so happy. And he meets him there where he is, and he's ready to forgive his son even before his son apologizes. He doesn't even need to apologize before that forgiveness is offered to him. And then he offers to throw a party to celebrate the fact that his son has come home. Now, you would think that's a really positive message and a message that any kid would like to hear, that you can mess up and come back home and your dad will forgive you and everything will be terrific. But when I was a kid, I found this parable really, really frustrating. Because it always seemed to me that the dad in the story was throwing a party for the wrong kid. Because there's another brother in the story, the older brother, who does all the things you're supposed to do. He takes the advice. He appreciates what he has. He stays home, and he gets along with his father and works hard and does all the things he's supposed to do, and he's not the one that gets the party thrown for him. And so I was always really frustrated and angry about that when I was a kid. But I had to go back to the story a number of times as an adult before I really understood that this is not a story about bad kids and good kids and which one the dad likes best. That's the way I understood it as a child. But as an adult, I understand that this is a story about the importance of going back. And more importantly, what happens when we do. We live in a culture that is just obsessed with progress, with moving forward and getting ahead. And it's a lot easier not to go back in this culture, not to admit that you made a mistake, not to figure out when you went wrong. When you get a C on that paper or an exam, it's easy to just put it in your binder and walk on and hope for the best later and not go back and figure out where the mistake was. And the narrative of progress in our culture is all about moving forward. So get a job, buy a house, get married, have a baby, buy a bigger house, buy a better car, have another baby, etc. It's all about moving forward. And that's why it's so difficult to think about going back. It's why it's so hard to do, because we don't see very much of it. And I think that's why so many students who start college don't end up finishing college, because you have to keep going back, right? You get done and you got to go back. You got to start over again. Sometimes it feels like you aren't getting anywhere because all you do is get done and go back and get done and go back. It feels like running in place sometimes. If you messed up last semester, you have to go back to school and face the professors and the students and your friends who know that you messed up. That's not particularly pleasant. Even if you decide to move on to a new college, you're going to try to make a fresh start that way, try to evade those mistakes of your past. Well, you still have to go back and face what you did every time you look at your transcript or your GPA. It's there waiting for you. And even if you've always been an excellent student, if you're one of those lucky people who has never really made a big mistake, you've always done well, well, you have to go back and keep doing that over and over again. You don't get to stop the first time you get the GPA that you wanted. You got to go back and do it again and again and again. And that's not easy either. But going back rarely is easy. Still, there's a reason, I think, why people have been telling stories about going back, stories just like this one that we started with, for as long as they have been talking to each other in English or in the many languages that preceded English. And there is a reason why we are all still giving each other that piece of advice. And that's because going back is how we learn. It's how we learn to get along with each other, by remembering how it feels to be disconnected and lost and alone, as the prodigal is. It's how we learn to appreciate what we have, by remembering a time when maybe we had a little bit less and realizing that what we have now is enough and maybe more than enough. Going back is the way that we seek whatever we need, whether what we need is connection or peace or the forgiveness that's going to let us move forward in a different direction, a better direction. Going back, not going forward. That's how we make a fresh start. And what this very old story is telling us about our lives, even today, is that when we are ready to go back, As soon as we turn around, we discover that God is right there, ready to meet us where we are, and in fact, ready to celebrate our return. Amen.